Hi everyone, this is Devleena welcoming you all once again to an exciting episode of Iconic Ads with Devleena and Saurabh. And I have my expert co-host with me, Mr. Saurabh Bajaj. Hi Saurabh, welcome here once again. Hi. And I am excited to announce our guest for today, Mr. Chandan Jha, who is the managing partner and founder at Simple Tribe. Welcome once again, Chandan, to Icons Behind Brands.
Hi.
And today, once again, we have you and one more new campaign, a new day, new brand. So, excited to talk about HDFC and this very unique campaign about, can secure mutual funds.
Can we have a speech, please?
Okay. Finally, I'm a graduate. Thank you, Mom. You're the rock on which my life is built upon. Yeah, and I would also like to thank Dad. This public display of emotion would have really got him embarrassed, very uncomfortable. He wasn't what you'd call a very touchy-feely guy, so I don't remember him hugging me, ever. When Dad got cancer, he just became softer. Jab no one was looking, he used to look at our family pictures and cry. And when he got very sick, I asked him, why didn't you put the money for your treatment? Why did you refuse it? So, with his slow, rasping breaths, he said he had to make a choice. Either it was his treatment or my future. But you know what, Dad? I would give back my degree just to have a few more days back with you. You had no right to take my dad from me, Dad. No right.
So, before we get into that, Chandan, we would like to know about your involvement with the brand, that particular point of time, your association, and a little bit about the campaign.
This particular piece is almost, I think, 7 years old, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. At that point of time, I used to be with Publicis and I was a business head at Publicis India. HDFC was one of the oldest businesses, or rather, we were the people who kind of launched this fund house in India to begin with. So we've seen the ups and downs of that journey, and we've also seen how kind of AMFI or SEBI has kind of put clamps down on mutual fund advertising guidelines and stuff like that. So all said and done, it was still one of those businesses which was very close to our chairman Nakul, and we were like whatever at it all the time.
So tell us about the association from the beginning. Like how did a relationship with HDFC pan out? What all are the various stuff that you guys worked on, and then how did this particular brief come about to be?
So there were two projects that I really spearheaded when it came to HDFC mutual funds. One was when it was mandated for all mutual fund companies to make their own investments in mutual fund education, right? So there's a lot of mutual fund education that we see around, which is being promoted not only by AMFI themselves, but also every mutual fund house by themselves. So that's a piece that we'll talk about separately. So that was one of the big spearheads. And the second one was this particular initiative. The idea was, how do you look at corporate social responsibility in a very mutual fund way? So it's very easy for a company like HDFC Mutual Fund to kind of take some money and park it with an NGO saying, okay, we've done our CSR for the year, and that's the approach that many corporates in India do take. So they might end up spending some of that money on creating some advertising around, but it's all parked into a social cause. This piece can't be looked at as standard advertising, and if you tell me that we have to do it in 30 seconds, it is not something that can happen in 30 seconds.
35?
No, not really. So because this needs time for this story to kind of brew, be told, and whatever. So do I have an open canvas? He said, okay, you please feel free to do whatever you want to, right? We've not written it as a 30-second, and nobody is looking at it as a 30-second at this point. Play out and record the story, and then we'll figure out how to do a 30-second version of it if we have to put it on television, right? So with that, he started thinking about the story. He started putting whatever the PPM elements into play and everything else. And then we get the call from the client office saying that, we'll not be able to do the campaign, right? Whatever, because we don't have the money within it to kind of, market. And instead of spending that money on trying to run it as ads or whatever as media monies, we will try and put that money back into CancerCure itself. So it just kind of got shelved. But we were so far into it by then that this happened on the day before the PPM, right? So we were so far into it that by then we had already kind of, locked who's the cast, who are the people, who are we doing this with, and everything else, right? So we said, okay, never mind, we will still make the ad. Even if it means it's not going to see television, it doesn't matter. We'll not put it on television. We'll run it wherever we can. We'll leave it on YouTube for people to share amongst themselves, right? We'll do something like that. Then it came down to saying who's financing it. So we don't know who's financing it, but it's okay. Nevertheless, let's go ahead and make it. So we just went ahead and made it.
No, there is so much of a discussion that happens around purpose, right? And eventually it's about making a real difference to somebody out there. I think it's one of those buckets which is very difficult to put it into, right? What is CSR? What's not? What's purpose? What's cause? What's philosophy? And all of those little things. But clearly this is one of those pieces where, makes a difference on multiple levels.
It's interesting, and this is something now that whenever I have a discussion on CSR with anyone, I'm like, yeah, theek hai, but why are we just, why are we not making it in a way that it really makes a difference? Now the conversations on CSR that I have with all my clients today is very different from, at least from this piece onwards, we started looking at CSR very.
Yeah, no doubt. I think the whole piece of engaging your consumers in CSR is also a big one, which is not something that probably anybody does. And tell me about, what we are saying. Does it in any way add to the HDFC master brand proposition or to the mutual fund proposition or the insurance proposition? Do you think that it borrows from one of those slivers, either in terms of creative treatment or in terms of the thought of philosophy?
So there's one thing that, with HDFC, which I find across what they do, right, is a bit of authenticity. They're true to. So unlike most of the mutual funds or unlike most of the insurance companies or for that matter banks, which start promising, the earth and the moon, and if you do this, then, bringing out a very optimistic picture of what things could be, is a lot more realistic in that form and is a lot more authentic about how they go about it. Even when I remember the earlier HDFC Life, and that's an insurance company which has nothing to do with the mutual fund company, other than having the same name as HDFC, whether it was Sar Utha Ke Jio at the first point, or something that they recently did, which was Khayal Aapka as a campaign, right? They still didn't get into hyperboles with any of them. They're very real and authentic about how they portray what the brands can do for the customers. So even within HDFC, when the second project that I spoke about, which is this whole thing of educating people on how to use mutual funds or how mutual funds can benefit them, was done in a very child's play manner. And we'll talk about the campaign maybe at some other point, right? There was a whole series within that. So it's never about taking it out of context, but keeping it authentic, keeping it real.
Yes. So Chandan, would you like to talk about any post impact, after publishing and once the target audience and the people they have,
even in terms of peer buzz or general consumer reactions?
Yeah, the impact, the acceptance.
Because it was such a small sample to it, right? So there's no real numbers to it. I think unlike most other marketing activity where we have a certain target, right? We know that, okay, we have to hit a certain sales number or whatever. There was nothing over here in that sense. The only thing that we remember at the end of it was that they had collected close to about 100 crores to kind of give out to CancerCure.
Which does not seem like a small response.
Yeah, that's why it's a huge.
I can't directly attribute it to the ad.
Right.
So that's why I don't want to get into saying whether it's this or that, right? Like, if it was supported by something saying, okay, so many 100 GRPs got spent on it, so then you can do a pyramid number to say that, where it's impacted and how it's kind of, come down to. Because there's no marketing funnel that I can put down on this, I really can't say how much of that 100 crores we can attribute to this communication.
Yeah, and this is so intelligent, plus it's very real and at the same time impactful. So I'm sure within that short span of time, whosoever have seen it, it might have impacted for sure. And this is the outcome of it.
Possibly, but again, like I wouldn't want to really, like put it down saying that this is what happened. Sorry.
Stuff like this, which creates a reverse funnel where you generate word of mouth. You have a few bunch of users who have become advocates, and sometimes that's build a lot more credibility. But yeah, you're right. It's very difficult to put a pen and paper to it and measure it or know anything about it from a quantitative perspective.
Correct. I can only say that even now when people see it, they're like, oh my God. You hear silence, you hear eyes well up. So all that happens. So this I will look at more from a perspective of saying, does it create impact? Does storytelling create impact in a way that that can be real?
No, for me, it's an interesting conversation because one, it talks about CSR, the role in brand building. Also talks about authenticity in storytelling. Again, it talks about when it becomes larger than just a brand campaign, it becomes something like a cross team sort of owns. So in that sense, it's a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, and the two terms, CSR and mutual funds, these are the perception is very different, the way people take it, and matching these two terms in such an intelligent way, at the same time it is aligning to the business goal and the brand goal. So I think it's an amazing piece of creation.
They're diametrically opposite, right? At one end you're talking about making money, on the other end you're talking about doing good with it.
Awesome one, Chandan. I just loved this. When I watched this, just before the conversation, so it was amazing, and once you explained it, it's really nice. It should have gone to the TVCs.
Hopefully. But anyway, so that's...
So tell us about the association from the beginning. Like how did the relationship with HDFC pan out? What all are the various stuff that you guys worked on, and then how did this particular brief come about to be?
So there were two projects that I really spearheaded when it came to HDFC mutual funds. One was when it was mandated for all mutual fund companies to make their own investments in mutual fund education, right? So there's a lot of mutual fund education that we see around, which is being promoted not only by AMFI themselves, but also every mutual fund house by themselves. So that's a piece that we'll talk about separately. So that was one of the big spearheads. And the second one was this particular initiative. The idea was, how do you look at corporate social responsibility in a very mutual fund way? Yeah. So it's very easy for a company like HDFC mutual fund to kind of take some money and park it with an NGO saying, okay, we've done our CSR for the year, and that's the approach that many corporates in India do take. They might end up spending some of that money on creating some advertising around, but it's all parked into a social cause. Yeah. At HDFC, we try to do it in a very mutual fund way, where we said that we are a fund house. Why don't we create a product which does this job of CSR versus just being a donation. So as a product, it is the safer debt fund in many ways that was designed, and people who invested in this fund could pledge a 50% or a 75% or 100% of their return on the fund towards being given away to cancer cure. Okay, and HDFC would take that same amount and match it up. To cancer cure. Okay, so that was the basics and the generic of how the product works, right? The genesis of how the product works. Most of it was sold to the existing customer bases within HDFC. So you really didn't need to create a lot more advertising to do so. But if you took it to the HNIs within HDFC who were investing with HDFC mutual funds, they managed to create a fairly large pool of money with that. Yeah. So that's the basics of how this product went by. Okay, that happened in the first iteration of what we did with Cancer Cure Mutual Fund, and it got labeled like that. In the second year, we wanted to go slightly gung-ho with it, with the first year being fairly successful. Yeah. In the second year, we said, okay, let's try and see if we can advertise and we can take it on national television and get people to kind of get involved in a fund like this. So we started working on as a national campaign. That okay, this is going to run across the country and it's going to run on some type of television networks and stuff. So my team was very gung-ho about it, and most advertising agency creative teams are very gung-ho about doing work on any social responsibility project, right? So they were very gung-ho. Incidentally, it was a brief that was opened up to every copywriter within the agency, right? So we were inundated with ideas and scripts by the end of the 3 weeks that we were on it. We went through a whole lot of it, and in fact I had to involve Bobby Pawar himself to kind of get into it and say that, okay, this is going to be tough. On who do you turn down? So how do you get onto this? So this was one of the pieces of work that came by, not as part of the filtration process, but eventually when we started building on saying that it's all nice, it's all clever, it's all interesting. What we don't have really is sincerity and the reality of it. Sincerity and reality were the two key words that we said, that how do you make it real, how do you make it sincere? Okay, because it's not a subject to joke around. We've seen enough of clever work that is done on anti-smoking and smoking causes cancer ads and all that. People get really, really clever with it. Some of it is intelligent, but what really misses out there is sincerity. And we said that this needs a lot of sincerity in how you approach it. So I don't want to name anyone, but there was a person who used to be working with me at one of my previous organizations, where he started being lax at office, and he stopped coming in on a few days and all that. It's only after he passed away is when we realized that the guy was, going through his own debacle with cancer, and he never told anyone anything. And I had moved on from that organization, and then I got to know of it about a year later, and I was like, oh my god, huh?
There used to be this guy in my own office in Cadbury's who used to be a chain smoker and unmarried and a slightly wild lifestyle, a procurement guy. I mean, a guy we all loved because he was just that kind of a personality, and he got cancer. The sad part was he almost recovered. So the cancer almost went away, but he couldn't stop smoking. And he couldn't stop that lifestyle, and then it came back in 6 months' time and just wiped him out. And it was like a one punch, second punch kind of a thing. So it's obviously extremely dreadful, and it's like probably a novelist one wrote. It's like it's like a hole in the universe that gets left behind when somebody dies so suddenly because of something as tragical as that. So it is something that does impact all of us in some shape or form.
So incidentally, he didn't even tell his mother. So that was a story that had stayed back with me. In fact, there are a couple of guys who passed on like that without really, any notice. So all we had to do was really underscore or present this story in the sincerest form that you could. When we spoke to Manoj Tapadia is the director of this particular commercial. I won't call it a commercial, let's say director of this expression. When we spoke to him and when we briefed him on this, he was literally in tears for a while, right? And it took him a bit to recover from it. And he said, this cannot be seen as an advertising piece. Yeah, this needs a treatment and a genre which is very different from what we see advertising as.
Wow. One of the very sensitive and interesting conversation which we had in the whole series, Saurabh, right? So I'm just curious to know about the key takeaways and learnings from this conversation for our viewers.
So very important conversation I think we've had today, because there's a lot which is said about purpose, and brands typically try to hook onto a larger purpose without always looking at what is the real difference that they are making, right? Now in this kind of a campaign, this is not necessarily something which had a larger than life kind of a purpose they wanted to solve, but yet I think it made a genuine difference to the consumer, and that's what matters. The second thing is that when it comes to CSR or purpose or causes, we struggle to figure out how can we get the consumer to participate. But sometimes it is as easy as, what was done here, saying that, you might want to contribute to a cause and we can enable you to do that and we will match your contribution. So I felt that was quite powerful in terms of really engaging with consumers. And finally, it is all about storytelling, saying that, authenticity, keeping it real is so important in storytelling, and we try to do it in an artificial construct of this much time, these many second days, this kind of a shoot. But, I just felt that this was a really real piece of communication, which is why it was so impactful. Yeah. And hence, in summary, the first part is the fact that brand purpose is how do you really impact the consumer, and we have to find simple ways to do that. Second, you can involve the consumer in CSR or in your own campaigns by asking the consumer to volunteer or contribute. And this is an example of a product that does it. And finally, storytelling has to be sensitive and authentic, which is what we saw in this piece. coming together. So in that sense, I think it was overall a very nice piece of campaign for us to reflect on. And if you are able to integrate all of this into your life, you will look at CSR, purpose, cause in a very, very different light than the way we currently see.
Superb. Such impact, key learnings and takeaways here, Saurabh. So it's very different thing. The CSR subject is very different. It's altogether a subject to explore and dig more. So thank you for sharing such lovely insights with us, and we love to have you here again and again.
Looking forward to next.